What's good, family? It's your boy Big L with another quick to farm blast, man. I know it's been a minute, but I've really been putting my feet on the ground, man, building in the community, working on some of these business ventures to not only sit here and to be preaching at you guys about the importance of group economics and black businesses, but also creating my own at the same time. But today, just sitting here doing some reading, man, listening to some jazz. I'm reading several books, but this particular book, Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome by Dr. Joy Degruy. Several people have been hipping me to this book for the longest time. And it's one of those things where I'm like, man, okay, I'm going to get to it, but I'm reading so much and I'm consuming so many doggone books at the same time. I love to read, but I began to want to understand the psychology and the mental aspect of black folk. Not even necessarily from the context of what white supremacy has done to us, but from the context of the effects upon us from white supremacy. Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we feel the way that we feel? Why do we respond the way that we feel? And many of the reasons for those things are directly connected to slavery. Much of our behavior, our thought process, our patterns are directly connected to slavery. So a homie had hit me up to this book, and I love it. I absolutely love it. It's walking through everything, man. Starting about the foolishness about how you have so many people lying and saying that they don't notice race. You can only say I don't notice something after you've noticed it. You know what I'm saying? But it was this particular passage that I was reading that I really wanted to share. I'm in chapter 4, and this chapter is called Post-Traumatic Slave Syndrome. It begins to deal with the actual syndrome. And this is written by an ex-slave. And when I read it, there's nobody here with me right now. And if it was, I would have probably, been sharing it with them as I often do when I'm reading something. But this particular passage really spoke volumes, and it gave a vivid picture of what it was like to be a slave and the everyday dangers and peril that they face. This is what it says. Who can imagine what could be the feelings of a father and mother when looking upon their infant child whipped and tortured with impunity and placed in a situation where they could afford it no protection? Okay? But we were all claimed and held as property. The father and the mother were slaves. I was compelled to stand and see my wife shamefully scourged and abused by her master, and the manner in which this was done was so violently and inhumanely committed upon the persons of a female that I despair in finding decent language to describe the bloody act of cruelty. My happiness or pleasure was then all blasted, for it was sometimes a pleasure to be with my family, even in slavery. I loved them as my wife and child. Little Frances was a pretty child. She was quiet, playful, bright, interesting, but I could never look upon the dear child without being filled with the sorrow and fearful apprehension of being separated by slave owners. Because she was a slave, regarded as property, and unfortunately for me, I am the father of a slave. It calls to mind the separation of husband and wife, of stripping, tying up, and flogging, of tearing children from their parents and selling them on auction blocks. It calls to mind female virtue, virtue trampled underfoot. But oh, when I remember that my daughter, my only child, is still here, destined to share the fate of all these calamities, it is too much to hear. Here's the line that really shook me as a father. It really spoke volumes, because in this passage you see how he really loves his daughter. You know, how he is able to pick up certain characteristics of her, that he's loves his child. But here's the line that really floored me. If ever there was one act of my life while a slave that I have to lament over, it is that of being a father and a husband of slaves. Written by Henry Bibb, 1849. If there was ever one act of my life while a slave that I have to lament over, it is that of being a father and husband of slaves. In that little brief paragraph, man, the brother talks about how he watched the slave masters rape his wife in a cruel, violent, and inhumane way. How his daughter was whipped and flogged by the slave masters. How he had to watch that. He described in his words, man, the powerlessness of those horrible, horrible acts. The powerlessness that he felt. Can you imagine the trauma that he experienced then, compounded on the trauma that his wife felt, that the trauma that him and his wife and child suffered. The impact of that trauma on his daughter's children. We often hear people talk about generational curses in such a spiritual, mystical, whatever type of format. But post-traumatic slave syndrome, the behaviors that slavery has committed, that slavery is directly responsible for, that the slavery has created that foundation for much of the behaviors that black folks are experiencing and dealing with. That's the real generational curse, family. That's the real generational curse. I encourage you guys, man, pick that book up. You can catch her lecture on this, Dr. Joy Degruy, on post-traumatic slave syndrome, man. You can catch her lectures all over YouTube. But you'll notice in the lectures, she'll often say that she doesn't have enough time to contain or to give all the information out that she normally has. But this book contains that information. I encourage you to get it. So when you're thinking about, man, and you're looking around at all the stuff that black people are doing and their inappropriate behaviors that they're involved in, instead of falling into the trap that the dominant society has created and that crack that they have created that gives people the impression that blacks are inherently criminal, begin to look at the root of the issue, the foundation that criminality is built on. And hopefully understanding what that behavior is built on will invoke in you a level of compassion, a level of understanding, a different perspective on what these folk are doing, what our people are doing. It should change the way we view each other. It's really hard for us to demand white supremacy to love us or to respect us or any of those other adjectives that so many black folks are dying to have white supremacy do. We got to begin to love ourselves. So, man, that was just a real quick little thing that was on my mind, man. I just wanted to share that with you guys. Pop in, show you that your big boy, Big L, Still around, still doing it, man. Still grinding, still out here fighting the good fight, man. You can still catch my show every Wednesday night on C Voice Radio, The Forum with your boy Big L. You can catch it live at 7 p.m. or you can visit the archives, man.